This is the number we always play when people ask us to play more, because we know that after we play this, they couldn't possibly ever want to hear us again.
We were loud, we were coarse, and we were strange.
He had so much talent. It defied everything.
You insist on very high and exacting standards.
I think if you shoot any lower than that, you're going to wind up with something sleazy.
Watch out where the huskies go. Don't you eat that yellow snow.
He was just writing all the time. He wouldn't stop.
He heard things a particular way, and then he tried to manifest them in the world.
Each show was like a composition.
Frank was considered the Pied Piper of Laurel Canyon. Any kind of rock star, especially the British guys who came to town, wanted to meet Frank.
I haven't heard anything like it before or since.
Frank embodied everything. You couldn't say, oh yeah, that's rock and roll, because it wasn't. It's jazz. No, it's pop music. No. Well, what the hell is this? It's Zappa.
Hey there, people, I'm Bobby Brown.
The Parents Music Resource Center wants a labeling system.
Frank became the go-to person because nobody else in the record industry showed up.
And my name is Bobby Brown.
We live in a country where we're supposed to be free. We supposedly have democracy. Here, what do? Sit around and go,
He was on a mission, and he was going to accomplish that mission no matter what.
I am in the process to see if it's possible for me to run for president in the United States. It's time for a revolution.
At every point in his life, he was trying to do the best thing that he could, to have no regrets.
Don't waste your time.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me about this really incredible documentary. I found out about it, I think, when Alex was in the early development stages, and he was like garnering or trying to get Kickstarter funds and trying to like crowdsource a project, which was many years ago. I mean, for you, when did you find out about this, and what's your relationship to Frank and his music?
Well, yeah, let's split those up. I mean, I came in pretty late, but I came in at a point, I think it was September of 19. At a point when Alex realized that having a score was going to be critical to telling the story. But the problem was, how do you put someone else's music relative to Frank's music? And that was where the discussions really began. And it was a very, very daunting idea to come up with. It's like, how do you do this? And how do you pay the proper respect and homage? How do you respect Frank's artistry and put score to go in a good portion of this film? How do you work that out? So that was really, I at first heard about it, I was like, I couldn't even imagine how it could be done, much less trying to do it myself.
Yeah.
And but Alex really guided me in terms of how to do that and how to come up with a solution to it. And that was really, really key.
I think something that's amazing about Frank's story is that he was always kind of a master of his own work, in the sense of retaining, artist rights, or trying to have a very close control and relationship with the releases. And so, when the film opens up and you have this vault basically in his home, I imagine, the home studio, and you see all the material and all the masters. And I imagine that for Alex, it was just a question of what can we use and what's not going to be used. I imagine that for you, was it easy to spot a film knowing that there's going to be so much material of Frank's throughout, or like how did you guys go about the spotting session then?
I think that the point of the spotting, which it's a really good question. In other words, where do you do this, was to the purpose of a score too was to accentuate. Okay, this is a really dorky analogy, but I love those. So, how in a multi-course meal you can sometimes have like a sorbet in between stuff, like a just a simple thing to cleanse the palate, to kind of change, to refresh you for this amazing culinary experience you're about to have. So if you think of this all as food, right? this multi-course, unbelievable meal that you're going to hear Frank's, the range of sound that you have in here and the range of musical ideas is so extraordinary that you kind of need something to give you, to get ready for the next idea and to emotionally connect you maybe to the story and to clear the space, open it up so that this huge other shift musically can happen.
You couldn't really categorize it. You couldn't say, oh yeah, that's rock and roll, because it wasn't. It's jazz. No, it really wasn't. It's pop music. No, not at all. Well, what the hell is it? It's Zappa. And I knew that it had changed my life. That's the thing. I didn't live my life and then look back on it and go, yeah, that was a life-changing moment. I walked out of that theater and I was actually disoriented. My whole world had been shaken up.
You know, for you, what was it like to, you know, kind of represent another composer's, you know, work or life through your music?
I think that a key idea was something that Alex and I talked about is that Frank liked film music. Mm-hmm. Is that he liked the idea of what a film composer did, of coming in and representing and being subservient or underneath to the story, to let the story be prevailing, and to write music which is the most, with the sole intention of narrative, to write music which is there to drive, support, embellish narrative. Not for music to be in the forefront of the idea, but to be secondary to narrative. And once I realized that that Zappa supported that idea, I could just go in and really be myself. Yeah. And find what is my emotional connection here, and how can I tell this narrative? How can I contribute?
Yeah, I really like your choice of instrumentation. I think it's like a hang drum. Is that what it is, or it's the hand?
Yeah, there is. It's not in this room. I would grab it for you. It's upstairs.
I know the sound very well. I have a good friend who plays it, and it invokes a very wonderful tone and just percussive nature. Like, did you start with something like that, or how did the sound evolve? Because there's great choice of instruments.
Well, the hang drum seems to me it's like an inverted steel drum.
Right.
And that's what I had one built for me that I really like, and I started using it. I used it extensively in a series called The Following with Kevin Williamson that Kevin Bacon started, and I used it to create these sort of modal rhythmic pads, like these just sort of evolving ideas. And I've always liked gamelan music a lot. Mm-hmm. And so there's something about the bell tones that you have this very complex overtone series where you pitch is defined very differently when you have a metallic thing which is struck, and then my drum is something called an earth tone scale, and I don't really remember exactly what it is, but it sits somewhere in between being major and minor, and it also has, if you hit it from one place, start in one place, you can kind of get a Phrygian vibe going on. So it just felt right. It felt like that was, I picked it up, and I don't really try to get too, once something feels right, I don't try to put it back into language. So the language, I think in scoring a film, you start with the language, then you cross over out of language into feeling. But to try to go back again, try to decide why is it right, isn't to me a musical idea. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's like a transition from linguistic ideas to sound, but don't try to come back, because then it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
We went past language.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's interesting because listening to your music alone, separated from Zappa's music, which is used in the film, which there's a lot of in both. I feel like your music allows the audience to be a little more introspective and take maybe Frank's journey a little more of just of seeing it through a lens of an artist, of seeing it not just maybe the persona of how he is on stage. When you guys were spotting and you were trying to define the right sound and tone, because there's great piano moments, there's great string moments and arrangements. Where did you guys land on that feeling early on, or what was the development of it?
I mean, there's certainly a shape. I think that there's maybe in his childhood there may be even almost like a very subtle Italian influence. Maybe there's a little of that. I try not to get too literal with these ideas. They're just again we're leaving language, we're going to another place, and so and then I think the claymation aspects of the film was where the palette could really expand out, because you're getting visually so far out. You're really departing from just these extraordinary images that push the edge of what the mind can even conceive of, and so that's where the palette could just get really weird as anything. And I used a lot of plugins, and I just kind of went down a strange little path, and found out where I was going. But tying it in, keeping organic instrumentation, keeping an organic feeling pervasive through it was very important to me. Maybe there's a subtext there of humanity. Maybe there's just that you wanted to feel players. You wanted to feel people being players and playing instruments.
Yeah. I love how he kind of talks. I mean, he mentions that, if I remember right, like in terms of, and maybe he's more spiritual than religious or specific in terms of kind of where he likes to draw the line in terms of his religious beliefs. It feels like, I mean, I think for him, it came across to me as, someone who has a deeply just dedication to his music. That was his life choice. He, it wasn't like he had other, I mean, he had his family and, I imagine, his personal life and relationship there. But I got the sense, obviously, that like his life was his music and the studio and the musicians that he surrounded himself with. It just, he was a one-man army. It wasn't like he relied on others to kind of maybe fulfill his musical habits or tendencies, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there, and there's so much in the film, and this is where Alex did. It's almost an unimaginable feat that he was able to capture the scope of a life, of Frank's life, in a way that you can have some access to it. I mean, you have 60 some albums. You have, I was just sitting there before this thinking about what do we want to talk about, and then all of a sudden I stumbled across the doo-wop album, which I didn't really know too much about, and found out that there's references in there to Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, and it's like there's just almost an infinite number of paths of not only musical exploration, but Frank was able to connect that philosophically towards what I think is human existence, is how do you live? How do you live in this modern world? What's important? What's significant? And I think Stravinsky approached that idea. I think Zappa approached that idea. And I think that's perhaps the storyline that I find most interesting about this is, given the situation of the modern world, how do you live? What do you do? Where do you start? And Frank just challenged himself constantly to challenge himself musically, to push into new terrain, and to me, that's an A+ life. That's it.
Yeah. So for you, when you did, when did you find out about this project then? What month was it? When was it?
I think it was September. So it was like September, October, November of 19.
Okay.
Could you imagine if I had known what was about to happen in the world?
Yeah. I mean, so with the amount of time that you were given, I mean, at that point, did they already have a locked edit? What was the progress of the film?
It was pretty far along. But again, then there had to be all this idea, this coming in with this idea that now there's going to be a significant portion of the film which is going to be scored. Required a lot of thinking, a lot of ideas, a lot of back and forth with myself and Alex. And Alex, I think it's a testament to how clearly he understands the subject, was able to give me very, very precise, this is working, this isn't working. We were able to in a couple months really hone in quickly into what was contributing to the narrative, what was contributing to the story.
Yeah.
And that felt really good. because I've never been so uncomfortable in starting a score, thinking about what are other people going to think of me putting music against Frank Zappa. I really didn't want to do it. I really was just, I was actually really terrified.
Yeah,
I don't have another word. I don't have another word.
Yeah,
I really was.
There's people who have a vision, a vision, an idea of who Frank is, and I think if you kind of rub people the wrong way or go in a direction or feel that doesn't maybe prescribe to their thought, then it's gonna catch people off guard, which I don't think your score did at all. But I definitely understand.
It probably will somebody, I mean,
okay,
someone's
sure,
going to say,
right.
this doesn't, and that's fine. I mean, you know what? And people need to do that. And it needs, you need to be that kind and maybe Frank would have done it. You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't know, but I think I encourage people to do that. I encourage them to think really openly and freely about it. Does this relate to it? To be really critical, to really think about music and what is the point and what is the purpose. I got thick skin, so come at me if you don't like it. Let's discuss it. I'll make you a coffee and let's talk. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So how much material did you think initially you needed to cover? I mean, what did Alex create spaces for you and montages and moments, or how did you start to determine the amount of material that needed to be, written?
Well, it grew a fair amount as we started to see the success of it, and we started to see that it was feeling right, and that by creating some space around in between Zappa's works was, I think, accentuating those works and putting them maybe. I think you could use the analogy of a picture frame a little bit. Is that we were framing his work, I think, very effectively by carving out space, but the silence didn't work.
Yeah.
And so there had to be a fill in. So I think there's some 35, 40 minutes of score in the film, which is a pretty big score. It's pretty large amount of terrain to cover. I tried to place the themes of the score that don't have names or they don't really have they don't have anything other than the theme. They don't have anything other than musicality to them. I hope they have musicality. Okay. So if they don't, we can discuss that too, but they just simply are themes, and and placing them in different areas to pull you to accentuate emotion was, I think, a priority.
That's great. Yeah.
And to leave room for dialogue, to leave, again, you have to be a film composer, because that goes back to I think a fundamental idea of what film music is, something that James Newton Howard really schooled me heavily on when I was starting, is that there's a strong correlation between film music and the history of opera, and that film music in film is tied to the concept of recit and aria, right? So you have big moments, which are aria, and you have narrative moments where you're driving a story, and that's the recit. And so maybe I think for the most part, I'm the recit. So I'm and then in framing these giant Zappa arias. So it's another way to look at it. There's a gazillion ways,
Yeah. So where do you tend to go when you are in the writing phase? Is it on a piano, one instrumentation, or at what point do you touch a computer? Where does your process start?
Well, I'm primarily a guitar player.
Yeah.
And so I did pick up the guitar quite a bit during this. And I'm a horrific piano player, which serves me very well as a composer, because my fingers have no idea where to go. But you hear there's a fair amount of piano in here. And so I did write on the piano a fair amount. Two guys that work with me, Nick Samiti and David Stahl, are additional music composers on the score. And David ended up playing a fair amount of the piano to make it, I think, have more of a precise and emotional touch. Has a beautiful touch as a player. And Nick contributed a lot too. So those guys get a big, kudos for their work on the score. They really were a big part of this and turning stuff around, and the amount of exploration that we did. But so that was, I think that when I'm writing, I mean, I keep a guitar handy around me at all times. The hang drum showed up quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I just grab whatever I'm thinking of. whatever my hands reach for, I just grabbed that. I got my mandolin back here too. I played mandolin a lot, but that didn't make it to. And actually, I think I did play mandolin on one place in the beginning, but I can't remember if we left it in. Yeah.
So when it comes to your recording the rest of the strings and the arrangements that you're doing, where did you guys end up going? How much of that can you do at home versus having to go to a stage?
Very small group of musicians on it. We were, but so we didn't have it was a small studio here in town, and we just got through it and did it in a day, which was it was interesting. It ended up being the anniversary of Frank's passing, which I didn't find out. I didn't realize that, and it was kind of an emotional thing to figure out, to find out later.
Did Alex attend the session?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And Alex, Alex is very involved in music. His son, who I haven't met, Alex's son, I'm looking forward to, who is, I guess, a fantastic trumpet player. And so I think music is a big part of the Winter household. And he has a fantastic knowledge where you can cross over, and I can talk about music in a musical way. I can go beyond just the emotional language of music and use terminology, which can be very hazardous and dangerous if someone doesn't have a precise understanding. There's a famous story. Have you ever heard the story about I don't even know where it started, but the half octave, where someone said some scoring session and someone said something was, the flute's too high, and said, well, I'll lower it an octave, and they lowered it an octave, and then now it's too low. Well, I'll go half an octave, so musicians get this joke a lot because that's one of the funniest things ever said to a musician. So you have to be very careful of, I think, as a film composer, when you go into our language of music on a technical level, because if it's misunderstood, you can create a real rat's nest of communication.
How does your perspective change on the work that you're doing in terms of from the writing stages to the scoring, and then obviously like seeing it with picture? Do you have a preference, or not preference, but how does your perspective change throughout the process of trying to find your way?
You mean just my perspective when I try something that doesn't work, as opposed to getting to the final idea? Or
I feel like sometimes when people start a project, they might have a very clear direction and they'll head in that direction, and then they might realize.
I do. I never have a clear direction in the beginning. I have what I try to find, and what I've worked with over the years, is I try to. Again, I'm going to go back to stuff that James Newton Howard taught me, because I learned so much working with James, is that there was a term that was called seeing what sticks to the film. Okay, so for some reason, some sounds stick to some images better than others. I don't have an answer why. So this is dependent on color and shape and movement. Almost perhaps there's a syntax to visual images, and there's some sounds that adhere, that glue to these shapes and colors more than others. And so one of the things that can be done early on in scoring a film is you just simply play all sorts of stuff against it, and you start to listen to what the film, boy, I'm sounding like some weird guru here, but you start to listen to what the film wants. Like, it literally will start to tell you what is going to stick to this, what can these images hold on to in a supportive way. And it's amazingly diverse from film to film, what type of sounds will work. You just find, I remember one of the most difficult films I ever worked on to find sounds that it wanted was Office Space.
Sure.
Because Office Space, there's a fair amount of score in there, but every scene worked with no music, but the film needed music. And so where did you put it, and what was it? And it's really tricky. And so when in doubt, play Hawaiian music, which was kind of the solution.
Yeah, Office Space. And I mean, I feel like composing for comedic filmmaking is a whole nother craft of understanding the timing and the rhythm of scenes. At what point did you guys figure out that what's the best way to say it? Like, I don't know. Frank's story is one that I feel like it's an artist's story, and artists resonate to his personal journey because we always feel like we're running out of time, where the clock is against us when it comes to projects, when it comes to our expectations, what we think we should be doing. And obviously with his, terminal diagnosis, it was a real challenge for him to kind of understand what his output could look like. Did you guys that third act, did you want to treat it differently? And when it kind of like from the diagnosis on, like, is there a tonality shift that was made?
Well, okay, to get really down to it here, being alive is a terminal diagnosis. If you really come to terms with what it means to be alive, it means to be, if we want to go to Jean-Paul Sartre, we can talk about moving toward, you're moving, we're all moving towards the end here. And this year I think has really pointed that out. And so what are you going to do with your time? What are you going to do? I think Frank Zappa did more than almost anyone can imagine, how he embraced that time. And that is what the third act, I think, is about. And to me, and maybe why this film is the most important thing I've ever been a part of, is because it speaks towards that idea so perfectly and so beautifully about what are you going to do? What are you going to be? How are you going to live? How are you going to present yourself? What is important to you? And I just think the message he sent is perfectly said. And Alex captured it. And that's what's so amazing,
Yeah, I love the genre of, just musical biography or subjects, and for me, I'm definitely familiar with his music. I didn't know much about his life and personal life and his early years, only because I've only been around as his music has been around, not when the individual was. Did you ever have a chance to see or meet Frank?
I didn't. And that's, I didn't see him and I didn't meet him, and I should have seen him, and that's a big mistake on my part. And I haven't spoken to him in years, but Tommy Mars, who was in the band, we were good pals in the 90s, and Tommy told me so many stories about being in the band and how intense it was. And so that's kind of a lot of it. I was just fascinated with that. So no, I didn't. And just the fact that I never went to a show is it's stupid. So I apologize to Earth.
No, that's all right. It's more of a question because
it's like, it's the things that I like. How could I miss that? And I did it. I missed it.
Well, I think it's just interesting in terms of like your relationship to the material, to the individual, never having a chance to meet him. There's many times when I've listened and experienced people's work and never met the person because they've passed on. But, I've had a chance to listen to their work, whether it's been music or, sound recordings and sound designs. I just find that the way of honoring the person or experiencing them through their work, to me, has always been an interesting relationship when we're just left with what they left behind, which is a lot. Like you're saying, Frank left so much behind. So you kind of like, you're pulling together a puzzle of trying to paint a picture for someone's life and who they were. But obviously, there's so much great material that they captured over the years. You can kind of maybe get a sense of what it was like to be in the room with the person. Yeah.
And I think so. And for me, there's a lot of, I remember when I got to music school, I was at USC Music School, and I remember someone showing me the Black Page. Do you know what that's this? It's probably the most. It takes musical notation and rhythmic ideas to a level that were probably thought to be inexpressible in traditional music language before it was written. And it's a piece that Frank wrote, and it's in the film. And I remember seeing that my freshman year of music school and just thinking, I don't even know what this is. I still don't. And I still don't. I still look at it and I'm like, I don't know what those rhythms really are. And then I listen to it and it sounds so musical when it's performed. But that idea it feels like I'm encountering. That felt to me in my life like I was encountering Frank Zappa when I sat down and looked at the black page and thought, what is this? What in the world is this thing? And how intimidating is it? It's unbelievable what is represented on that piece of paper.
Did you have a chance did Alex have a chance to show you, or did you see any of the any of the compositions that he was working on that he did have that maybe hadn't surfaced or that weren't ever actualized?
Oh, scores that weren't recorded?
Yeah.
No, I would love to look at that. I mean, I love to. That would be really cool to see some of the things that were unfinished.
That's the thing about these artists, from Michael Jackson and Prince, and there's so many, Tupac. There's all these artists that have all this material that they've recorded, and then after their passing, we just find that there's material. I just seen that opening shot of of his vault. I can only imagine, for someone who had a home studio at any time could go down and record something. And, at the time, I imagine tape wasn't as hard to come by as it is now, just.
or the written scores, which would probably be, and the type of music that was being composed by Frank at that time is probably pretty hard to hear in your head. You're dealing with pretty tricky stuff to look at a score and actually hear it. So, but I would still love to see them. Love to take a look at those. Yeah, that's a cool idea. Yeah.
But was there anything that I think maybe like when you first found out, like I can understand being intimidated, of just the idea of trying to represent his story through your music, which I think is just, you executed so well. I mean, listening to your score by itself is just like a really incredible journey because it captures.
Wow, thank you.
Well, it captures a lot of. That's why I like hearing film scores in context of the film, but then listening to it by itself, obviously there's look at the track names that there are, from the various kind of moments and kind of milestones in the film, the story points. Like, when did you guys figure out that you kind of covered everything that you wanted to through the score? Because I imagine with a shorter amount of time, you're limited in terms of how much you can do, and maybe only, like you were saying, you only recorded one day. I mean, like, did you feel like you were trying to chew off too much in the initial beginning, or like what was the balance of the two of you and Alex kind of understanding with the time and expectation of where score needed to carry, like how much you needed? Your score, your material needed to, be represented.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and I think that it goes to looking at the film, and we played back the whole film. We did complete viewings, and that's the way to do it. The hard part is that the hard part for me is that once seeing a film, when I see it the first time I see it, it imprints into my head in a way that it's very hard to unsee it. And one of the challenges of being a film composer is actually not using that sort of recorded image of the film in your mind when you're viewing the current version of the film, and not remembering what was there, but seeing what is there. And that's a skill that really takes a lot of time. And I think as I've gotten older and my memory's gotten a lot worse, I've gotten much better at it. So maybe I tend to not really remember. I don't know. I remember really weird details. I remember stuff I read, but I don't remember a lot of like people and things like that. I can remember chess moves and books I've read. And bluegrass songs. That's about it. Yeah.
So when you guys finished, when did you guys pretty much have to wrap up and deliver for your
it was song? I think it was literally, we're talking almost a year to the date. It was I think the final playback was literally the day before. It was probably December 20th, around there, so it was like sort of everything closing down for the holidays. Yeah.
And do you like to go into the mix sessions? Do you like to be present? How do you like to navigate that?
I like to go to the mix stage. I'm very useless there to be there for a long time. And quite honestly, my ears get numb very quickly. And the process and the way and the way that you need to dub a film is you need to go over things again and again. And I'm thinking so much about music that my ears just exhaust out and I'm just hearing nothing. So I have to get out of the room, come back in, and then really focus, sit down, go through a whole playback. But I'm pretty good at it now. I can hear when I feel something is out of place, too loud, it just not connecting. One of the skills that it's taken me decades to figure out, but I'll probably figure out at my very end of my life, is that when something isn't working, there's a very tiny voice in me that says, hey, this sucks, and the maturity to listen to that little, whatever it is, instinct, whatever it is, has taken me decades to just learn to not get in the way of that intellectually, but to listen up when I get that little sensation, hey, that's not working, and to not argue with it, to acknowledge it, to really honor it, and go down the road to trying to use my brain now to figure out what is the problem. Okay, because I trust it all the time. When I hear that little thing, this cue's not working. Something's wrong about the music here. I don't disregard it. The only time I'll really push it aside is just there's no time and I'm getting in the way by trying to make the time to do it, or if everybody else disagrees with me, but I'll still make myself heard, because that's my responsibility to the film at all times, is to give my instinct. So I think that's one of the hardest things to develop in this field, is the ability to navigate between what you know and what you feel. And it's an opportunity for me to always get better at it, to always get better at listening to my gut. I don't, if you're into this stuff, there's a scientist that I really love. I think his name is Damasio. I think he's studying at US. I think a lot of his work is done at USC. But literally that the gut is a second brain. It really functions like a brain. And so really learning to think of and feeling what you get in your gut as a form of cognition. So this is kind of the stuff I'm into, and how far I can really take that as a human in listening to that, and then using this guy up here to navigate, well, how do I solve that? Right? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's always a question of, people under pressure in terms of just reacting, that muscle memory of going in a process or a thing that just feels natural and feels like the least resistant.
Oh yeah. There's a moment, and there's a moment in, and I won't even tell anybody where it is, but there's a moment in the the original Beavis and Butthead movie, in Beavis and Butt Do America.
Do America, yeah.
Yeah, and there's this one moment in the score where there's a clear mistake, and I talked myself out of fixing it. Sorry, Mike. And I just, I kept rationalizing it, that this was, oh no, that makes sense. If I look at the notes on the page, that adds up, and but it still sounds wrong to me. To this day, it drives me crazy. You know what I mean? And that's kind of my benchmark for always listening to the musical instinct. And maybe this is something to really talk about what I think a lot of the musicians that played in with Frank, that perhaps that we're honing in on what makes a musician transcend what they know into creating music which is above and beyond, right?
Yeah, I love the perspective of like these kind of like, session day players versus someone like Steve Vai, who was kind of that in a way, like he was just a hired gun. But knowing that the potential of these players is so great, that being pushed out of their comfort zone isn't fun, and it isn't something that people like. It feels like you're being told to do something that just feels mean, or just I don't know. It rubs you the wrong way. But ultimately, people understood that was what made Frank the type of collaborator that he was. It's serving his vision, but really
Or if you look at, I was just before this, I was looking on YouTube at some of Frank's greatest guitar solos, right?
Oh wow.
And there's this one moment, I forget what the song was, but where it's starting to sound a little bit like Adrian Belew, and I'm sort of a King Crimson fanatic, and then I'm wondering, well, wait a minute, is that where is the genesis of that, and where's the crossover? And you probably could ask Adrian Belew this question. I've never met Adrian, but he's a guitar player that I've always just cherished and loved, and everything with Robert Fripp, everything out of King Crimson is just, amazing to me. So I think that's what's so cool about this, is that the number of people and the number of great musicians in the band just blurred the line in between. Where was this music coming from? Was it these people all being in one band together? Was it the cross-pollination of all these ideas? You look at the list of players, and it's just so stunning. It's shaped so much other music.
Yeah.
Like his hand, if you think of it as this tree, it just grew out into so much music.
It's one of those things. It doesn't happen very often, but I think it's only after you have the perspective of looking, so many years away from it, that you see. I mean, at the time, I'm sure it felt avant-garde. It felt out there. It felt weird. It pushed the norm and challenged people as an audience of like, what are we? Is this music? What, there's so
is
many,
this music?
Yeah.
And this is a really good question. Is this music? And obviously, a lot of the composers of the time, you have. I always forget, is it 4 minutes and 33 seconds or 3 minutes?
Oh, John Cage.
Yeah, exactly. So where you have the ultimate question, is silence music? And I can confidently say that these subjects were on the table, right?
Yeah.
And that what is music? I was just reading this morning how Plato wanted to ban flute music in the Republic.
Right.
He thought that flute music in particular was a particular problematic because of what it invoked in the human soul, and that in a properly run state you wouldn't have any flute music at all. So there you go. Thanks, Plato.
Yeah.
I
think it's interesting to tell Frank's story now, in this year of where we are, and only because the social norm, the expectation of what is, the right way to do anything has been thrown out the window. There is no right way, and it makes us all kind of like we were talking about earlier, of like looking in of what our purpose is, or how we use our time, and it really forces us to do something that maybe we never really wanted to face because it just never was right in front of us like it was now. So it's I
mean, I'm really optimistic with all the challenges that people are facing now. That maybe something beautiful musically will happen from this. That maybe some wonderful renaissance of musical greatness, of human emotional expression through music, will be the result of challenge, right? And I stay ridiculously and probably stupidly optimistic in that. But I do think that. I do think that a lot, and I really want that to happen, and to the forefront, to the continuation of humans finding a way to express what they feel and what is important about how they feel, and communicating that to another through music is so fundamental to existence and so fundamental to being human. And that's why this film, to me, is critically important. I keep saying that when advertising music products starts to be about how good it sounds rather than how convenient it is, we'll be rounding the corner, right? As long as you see products out there that just advertise convenience over quality, we're heading down the nasty quagmire. But that may turn. I hope it turns. I hope we get to see a great musical renaissance.
I feel like this film should be seen. Well, here's the first thing I would say is you don't have to be a fan of Frank Zappa to appreciate the just genius artist that he is. It doesn't. For me, it's not like I own a Frank Zappa album. That's not true. I own one, which is the Quadrophiliac one, which is like a quad album he did. Yeah. I take that back. I do own a Frank Zappa album, but it's not like I listen to it on the regular basis. But I could tell you that from watching the film, what I definitely took away is that the artist's journey is one that is universal. That the individual's kind of expectation of what they could be doing or should be doing or what their place in the world is still relevant. And I just feel like that seeing it through Frank's lens to me was, I don't know, in a time when we feel like we're all, like, as a composer's life, you know, it's kind of a life in the studio by oneself. You know, it's not really collaborative until you start bringing other players in recording.
And I think you're touching on what's so beautiful in Frank's life, and how Alex Winter was able to capture it. Is this about music, or is it about living? And could he have been a painter? Well, he was such a multifaceted artist. Right, you know, what are we really looking at? What is the subject? You know, and I think that that's where this film talks about living. It talks about being true to yourself, about expression.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it's coming out. I believe it's November 27th, if that's right. It's going to be on demand and in theaters. And, you know, I think it won't be too long until your soundtrack and the work will come out too. I'm ready.
I really hope people enjoy it, you know, but more importantly is that the score contributes to the telling of this incredible story. And that's where I hang my hat.
I think for fans of his music, they're going to be pleasantly surprised by the soundtrack release. It's an insane. Well, you said it was the first time that your work has been released on vinyl, so I mean that's exciting too.
Oh yeah.
Is there more material that wasn't on the release that was used in the film, or is it pretty much?
I think there may be a few scraps here and there, but I think you know, sometimes there's more scraps left over in the end. But there was probably a few abandoned ship ideas early on. I usually try 3 or 4 things, and you know, I try to write fairly quickly without getting in my own way, and just see what blah, blah, blah comes out. And then refine it later. That's kind of my approach.
Yeah.
But I think we use most of it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So where can people keep track of what you're up to? Where you're? Do you have much of a social media presence these days?
I'm not a big fan. It's really not smart professionally, but I just detest it. I'm sorry, I do. I just don't think it's a healthy way for humans to correspond. If anybody wants, I probably can't meet with everybody on Earth, but I'd love to have coffee with you. You know, when we can do that.
If someone sees you on the street, you're giving them. It's okay to, say hello.
And it's something I really believe in. I believe in making the people I love and care about my front page. That's my. I think the word like and the word friend should be highly valued and not thrown about in such a dismissive way.
Totally get it. And I agree. Yeah, it's so true. Well, John, thank you so much for taking this time to chat about this film. I just, you know, following your work over the years and being a fan of what you've been doing, I was so curious what, you know, your perspective was going to be on a film like this. I cannot, you know, imagine any composer walking into this and not being intimidated by the task. Just because,
very intimidating.
Yeah, it's a tall order, and I'm so happy with what you're able to achieve. So congratulations.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. That feels great, and I think it's a wonderful film. I encourage everybody to see it and to really think about it. So here we go.